Excalibur. Excalibur is the face of Warframe and one of the first frames we ever encountered. Built around swordsmanship, he is the perfect all-rounder. His signature Exalted Blade creates waves of energy with every swing, allowing him to cut through entire groups of enemies. While simple to learn, Excalibur remains one of the strongest melee-focused Warframes in the game. Mag controls magnetic energy, making heavily armored enemies her specialty. Many new players underestimate Mag because of her low survivability, but against heavily armored enemies, she becomes one of the deadliest Warframes. She can strip defenses, pull enemies together, and create magnetizing bubbles that trap bullets and massively increase damage. Although she looks fragile, a skilled mech can wipe out entire rooms by turning enemy fire against itself. Volt harnesses electricity to become one of Warframe's fastest and most versatile frames. His speed ability boosts movement and melee attacks, while Electric Shield protects allies. Volt isn't just fast, he's one of the few Warframes that dominates both beginner missions and endgame Eidolon hunting. Whether you're farming relics or hunting Eidolons, Volt has remained one of the game's most useful Warframes for years. Rhino is Warframe's living tank. His famous iron skin surrounds him with a nearly unbreakable layer of armor, allowing him to ignore huge amounts of damage. Rhino is also one of the first Warframes most players craft because of how early his blueprints become available. Even years later, veteran players still bring Rhino into Steelpath, simply because Roar remains one of the strongest universal damage buffs in the entire game. Rhino is often recommended for new players because he can survive almost anything while making the entire squad stronger. Hey Tenno, if you're enjoying the content so far, a sub would be appreciated. Enjoy the video. Loki proves that you don't need raw power to dominate the battlefield. Instead of fighting head-on, he specializes in deception. Loki defines stealth play. Experienced players still use him for spy missions because enemies simply can't fight what they can see. Although no longer considered the strongest frame, Loki remains one of Warframe's greatest stealth specialists. Ember controls devastating fire abilities capable of burning entire armies alive. She rains meteors from the skies, ignites enemies across huge arenas, and grows stronger as the battlefield heats up. Once famous for effortlessly clearing missions, Ember was later reworked into a more active caster, while keeping her identity as Warframe's Master of Fire. Frost. When defense missions become difficult, Frost is often the answer. His iconic snow globe creates a protective barrier that blocks incoming attacks, making him invaluable for defending objectives. Combined with powerful ice attacks that freeze entire groups of enemies, Frost has remained a classic defensive Warframe since the game's earliest days. Nova. Despite her appearance, Nova is one of the most dangerous Warframes ever created. She manipulates antimatter, allowing her to create explosions powerful enough to erase entire groups of enemies. Her signature ability, Molecular Prime, slows or even speeds up enemies while causing devastating chain reactions. Because of her incredible crowd control and damage, Nova has remained a favorite in endgame content for over a decade. Ashe is Warframe's master assassin. Built around stealth and precision, he eliminates enemies before they even realize he's there. His iconic Blaze Storm allows him to instantly mark multiple targets before executing them in a series of brutal finishers. Although many newer Warframes have entered the roster, Ashe remains one of the most effective stealth specialists. Trinity. Whenever a squad needs to survive impossible odds, Trinity is often the answer. Rather than focusing on damage, she keeps her entire team alive through healing, energy restoration, and powerful damage reduction. In Warframe's early years, Trinity was considered almost mandatory for endgame content because of her unmatched support abilities. Nyx controls the battlefield through pure manipulation. Using psychic abilities, she can confuse enemies, force them to fight each other, and completely strip away their defenses. Her signature ability, Chaos, turns entire rooms into complete madness, allowing Nyx to control fights without relying on overwhelming firepower. Sarin is one of the deadliest Warframes ever created. She spreads deadly spores between enemies, causing damage to multiply as infections spread across the battlefield. Combined with corrosive toxins and massive area damage, Sarin is capable of clearing entire missions faster than almost any other Warframe when used correctly. Vauban proves that intelligence can be just as powerful as brute force. Armed with an arsenal of advanced gadgets, traps, and grenades, he dominates crowds through control rather than raw damage. His Bestial and Vortex abilities can suspend or pull entire groups of enemies together, making them easy targets for both himself and his squad. Hey Tenno, if you're enjoying the content so far, a sub would be appreciated. Enjoy the video. Banshee turns sound itself into a weapon. Her abilities reveal enemy weak points, amplifying incoming damage, and unleash devastating sonic attacks capable of staggering entire groups. Although she isn't built to absorb punishment, experienced players can use Banshee's damage multipliers to eliminate even the toughest enemies in seconds. Necros. Death only makes him stronger. As Warframe's necromancer, he can summon fallen enemies to fight alongside him while terrifying nearby opponents. However, he is best known for Desecrate, an ability that forces defeated enemies to drop additional loot. Because of this, he remains one of the most valuable farming Warframes in the entire game. Valkyr. Valkyr's story is one of the darkest in Warframe. After being captured and brutally experimented on by the Corpus, she emerged consumed by rage. In battle, Valkyr becomes nearly unstoppable, entering Hysteria to unleash devastating claw attacks, while becoming almost impossible to kill. Her tragic past makes her one of the most iconic Warframes in the game's lore. Oberon. Oberon serves as the guardian of nature, combining healing, protection, and divine judgment into one Warframe. Inspired by ancient forest guardians, he restores wounded allies while punishing enemies with radiant energy and sacred ground. Although often overlooked, Oberon became one of Warframe's most dependable support frames, thanks to his ability to keep entire squads alive during long and difficult missions. Hydroid. Hydroid controls the power of the sea itself. He floods battlefields with crashing waves, summoning tidal surges, and calls forth enormous tentacles to trap entire groups of enemies. Inspired by legendary pirates and sea monsters, Hydroid specializes in controlling large crowds rather than overwhelming them with raw damage. After receiving a major rework, he transformed from one of Warframe's weakest frames into one of its strongest area control specialists. Mirage. Mirage is the master of illusion. She creates perfect copies of herself, blinds enemies with dazzling lights, and manipulates the battlefield through deception rather than brute force. Behind her playful personality lies one of Warframe's deadliest damage dealers. According to the lore, Mirage continued fighting impossible battles long after victory became hopeless, earning her place among the most fearless Warframes ever created. Zephyr. Zephyr dominates the skies using the power of the wind. Capable of launching herself high into the air, creating devastating tornadoes and deflecting incoming projectiles, she turns mobility into her greatest weapon. Her lightweight design allows her to move across battlefields with incredible speed, while controlling enemies from above, making her one of Warframe's most unique aerial combat specialists. Limbo. Limbo exists between two dimensions at once. Through mastery of the Rift, he can completely separate allies and enemies into different planes of existence. While inside the Rift, combat follows entirely different rules, allowing Limbo to defend objectives and control battles unlike any other Warframe. His unique mechanics make him one of the most difficult frames to master, but also one of the most rewarding in the hands of experienced players. Mesa. Mesa is Warframe's legendary gunslinger. Built around unmatched precision and lightning-fast reflexes, she eliminates enemies before they even have a chance to react. Her signature ability transforms her into an unstoppable turret capable of targeting dozens of opponents in seconds. Inspired by classic Western outlaws, Mesa remains one of the strongest weapon-focused Warframes ever introduced. Chroma. Chroma channels the power of dragons. Rather than relying on a single element ability, he can harness fire, ice, electricity, or toxin depending on the energy color equipped. His thick armor and devastating damage buffs allow him to become stronger as battles grow more dangerous. Chroma's intimidating appearance and adaptable powers have made him one of Warframe's most iconic, heavy-hitting Warframes. Atlas. Atlas is the embodiment of raw strength. Forged from living stone, he crushes enemies with earth-shattering punches, summons massive rockfalls, and commands powerful stone companions during combat. According to Warframe lore, Atlas once destroyed an enormous asteroid that threatened an entire world using nothing but his overwhelming power. Few Warframes better represent unstoppable physical force than Atlas. Wukong. Inspired by the legendary Monkey King from Chinese mythology, Wukong is one of Warframe's most durable and versatile fighters. His signature ability creates a powerful clone that gives players a permanent teammate. Combined with incredible survivability and mobility, Wukong has become one of the most popular Warframes in the game, especially for players who enjoy tackling missions alone. Ivara. Ivara is Warframe's master hunter. Rather than charging into battle, she excels at remaining unseen while carefully eliminating enemies one by one. Her abilities allow her to turn invisible, steal valuable items directly from enemies, and fire a powerful exalted bow capable of piercing multiple targets. Patient players are rewarded with one of the stealthiest and most methodical playstyles in the entire game. Neja. Inspired by the Chinese deity of the same name, He glides across the battlefield with incredible speed while using divine fire to burn enemies and protect himself. His signature protective halo absorbs massive amounts of damage, allowing Neja to remain surprisingly tanky without sacrificing mobility. Inaros. Inaros is the ancient king of the desert. Unlike most Warframes, he relies almost entirely on his enormous health pool instead of shields, making him incredibly difficult to kill. Using the power of the sand, he blinds enemies, summons devastating sandstorms, and drains life directly from his opponents to restore his own. His unique approach to survival has made him a favorite among players who simply refuse to go down. Hey Tenno, if you're enjoying the content so far, a sub would be appreciated. Enjoy the video. Titania. Titania brings fairy magic into Warframe. Inspired by the Queen of the Fairies from Shakespearean mythology, she has the unique ability to shrink herself and freely fly through missions while wielding her own pair of exalted pistols. This tiny form allows her to avoid danger, move through tight spaces, and rain bullets onto enemies from above. Few Warframes feel as mobile or as magical as Titania. Nidus. Nidus is unlike any other Warframe because he fully embraces the infestation instead of fighting against it. Rather than using traditional energy, many of his strongest abilities grow stronger through mutation stacks earned during combat. As battles continue, Nidus becomes increasingly difficult to kill while spreading infestation across entire groups of enemies. His ability to constantly evolve makes him one of Warframe's most unique scaling characters. Octavia. Octavia proves that music can be a weapon. Every one of her abilities revolves around rhythm, allowing players to strengthen themselves and their teammates simply by moving or firing in time with her custom songs. She can distract enemies, boost damage, grant invisibility, and amplify her team's power through music alone. Octavia's creative design makes her one of the most original Warframes ever introduced. Harrow. Harrow is Warframe's Dark Priest, and one of my favorites as well. His abilities revolve around sacrifice, rewarding careful management of shields, health, and timing. He protects allies, restores energy, increases critical chance, and turns incoming damage into powerful team-wide buffs. While his mechanics require more planning than many other Warframes, players who master Harrow become invaluable supports capable of dramatically increasing an entire squad's performance. Protea. Protea was created to serve Parvos Granum, the legendary founder of the Corpus. Designed as his personal guardian, she possesses incredible control over time itself. When Parvos became trapped within the mysterious Granum void, Protea remained behind for centuries, endlessly defending him against anyone who dared to enter. Her abilities let her deploy automated turrets, replenish ammo and energy for allies, and even rewind time to restore her previous state, making her one of Warframe's most tactical and versatile frames. Gara. Forged from living glass, Gara became a legend after sacrificing herself to destroy the colossal sentient known as the Eidolon. Her remains were later recovered and rebuilt into the Warframe we know today. Gara commands razor-sharp glass to trap enemies, create defensive barriers, and unleash devastating explosions. Khora. Khora is a fierce huntress who fights alongside her loyal Khavat companion, Venari. Khora specializes in crowd control, locking entire groups of enemies in place before eliminating them with brutal efficiency. Thanks to her synergy with Venari and her powerful damage potential, she remains one of the strongest farming and crowd control Warframes in the game. Revenant. Revenant was once a guardian protecting the plains of Eidolon, until the sentient energy transformed him into something entirely new. Instead of resisting the corruption, he embraced it, becoming one of the most powerful Warframes ever created. Revenant can enthrall enemies to fight for him, absorb incoming damage with Mesmer Skin, and unleash deadly waves of sentient energy, earning his reputation as one of Warframe's toughest and most survivable frames. Garuda. Garuda is the embodiment of bloodshed. Every one of her abilities revolves around sacrificing health to unleash even greater destruction. She grows stronger as danger increases, rewarding aggressive players willing to stay on the edge of death. Garuda tears enemies apart with razor-sharp talons, drains their life force, and rains devastating attacks across the entire battlefield, making her one of Warframe's most brutal and offensive Warframes. Baruch. Baruch is a peaceful monk who avoids violence whenever possible. However, once his restraint is exhausted, he unleashes his exalted fist in an unstoppable barrage capable of leveling entire armies. His unique restraint mechanic reflects his calm personality, forcing players to remain patient before revealing his true power. This contrast between serenity and overwhelming destruction makes Baruch one of Warframe's most unique designs. Hildren. Unlike nearly every other Warframe, Hildren doesn't use energy to cast abilities. Instead, she consumes her massive shield reserves, allowing her to dominate battles while ignoring traditional energy management. She strips enemy armor, shields allies, and absorbs incredible amounts of damage without slowing down. Her unique mechanics make her one of the strongest tank Warframes available. Wisp. Created using the immense power of Mysterious Soul Gate, Wisp exists partially between dimensions. She glides gracefully across the battlefield while empowering teammates through her powerful reservoirs, granting health, speed, and crowd control. Wisp can become invisible while airborne, blind enemies with bursts of light, and unleash a devastating beam of pure solar energy. Thanks to her incredible versatility, she's become one of the most popular and universally useful Warframes in the entire game. Gauss. Built entirely around speed, Gauss is one of the fastest Warframes in the game. His abilities allow him to sprint across maps at incredible speeds, generate kinetic energy through movement, reduce incoming damage, strip enemy armor, and massively increases fire rate and attack speed using Redline. Gauss excels in almost every type of content thanks to his incredible mobility and survivability. If you enjoy aggressive, fast-paced gameplay, Gauss is one of Warframe's most rewarding Warframes, and also he's my favorite frame ever. Grendel. Grendel fights in one of the strangest ways imaginable. He literally eats his enemies. Also, he is Gauss's best friend. His first ability allows him to swallow enemies whole before using them as fuel for his other abilities. He can spit enemies back out as projectiles, strip armor, provide buffs to allies, and even curl into a massive ball rolling across the battlefield while crushing everything in his path. Essentially, he's a meatball. Although his gameplay looks silly, Grendel has become surprisingly powerful after several reworks. Zaku. Next up is Zaku. Unlike most Warframes, Zaku isn't a single Warframe at all. They are a broken collection of several destroyed Warframes fused together by the Void. Their abilities revolve around Void damage, stealing enemy weapons, stripping defenses, and manipulating time itself. Zaku's fourth ability freezes the duration of all their other active abilities, allowing experienced players to maintain incredible damage and crowd control almost indefinitely. They are one of the strongest endurance Warframes currently available, and you can easily take Zaku to level cap. Lavos. So Lavos is completely unique because he doesn't just use energy. Instead, every ability operates on cooldowns. Before casting abilities, Lavos can combine different elements together, allowing him to create viral, corrosive, radiation, blast, and every other elemental combination whenever he wants. This makes him incredibly versatile against every faction in the game. Players willing to learn his elemental combinations are rewarded with one of Warframe's most flexible damage dealers. Savagoth. Savagoth is essentially two Warframes in one. His normal form weakens enemies using shadows while harvesting souls through combat. Once enough souls are collected, Savagoth transforms into his powerful shadow, gaining an entirely different set of abilities focused on devastating melee attacks. Following his prime release, Savagoth became one of the strongest Warframes in the game thanks to his massive damage potential and excellent survivability. If you enjoy switching between ranged abilities and aggressive melee combat, Savagoth offers one of the Warframe's most satisfying playstyles. Yareli. Coming in next is Yareli. Yareli is Warframe's aquatic themed Warframe. She specializes in mobility, crowd control, and secondary weapon combat. Using her signature K-Drive companion Merulina, Yareli can surf across the battlefield while greatly reducing incoming damage. Her abilities trap enemies inside water bubbles, weaken opponents, and boost the effectiveness of pistols. Although she had a difficult launch, several updates have made Yareli significantly stronger, especially for players who enjoy secondary weapons. Caliban. Our next Warframe is Caliban. Caliban is the hybrid creation of sentient technology and Warframe design. His abilities focus on adapting to combat by summoning sentient allies, stripping enemy armor, lifting groups of enemies into the air, and unleashing devastating beams of energy. Following multiple buffs, Caliban has become a much more capable Warframe than when he originally released. His armor stripping abilities alone make him extremely valuable during Stillpath missions. Gyre. Finally, we have Gyre. Gyre is an electricity-focused Warframe capable of producing enormous amounts of critical chance and chain lightning. You will always see red damage numbers with her. Her abilities constantly spread electricity damage between enemies, while her passive dramatically increases critical hits whenever electricity status effects occur. When properly built, Gyre can wipe out entire rooms through continuous electrical chain reaction without ever needing to fire a weapon. She is especially effective against large groups of enemies and remains one of the strongest elemental Warframes currently available. Styanax. Styanax is heavily inspired by the classic warrior archetype. He uses a spear and shield, and most of his abilities revolve around stripping enemy defenses, generating energy, and turning himself into an incredibly aggressive frontline fighter. His passive already gives him a pretty interesting advantage. Styanax gains increased critical chance based on his shields, which means maintaining those shields isn't just about surviving, it directly improves his damage output. His first ability throws his Axios Javelin at an enemy, impaling them and potentially pinning them against nearby surfaces. His second ability, Terror Strike, is where things get much more interesting. Styanax swings his shield in front of him, damaging enemies while stripping their armor and shields. That makes him particularly useful against heavily armored enemies because he doesn't have to rely entirely on someone else to remove their defenses. Then there's Rally Point. Styanax plants his spear and creates an area around himself that constantly regenerates energy for him and his allies whenever enemies are killed. So the longer your team keeps fighting, the more energy everyone gets back. Styanax launches himself into the air and starts throwing an absurd number of spears at enemies below him. It's basically the Warframe equivalent of calling in an airstrike, except you're the airstrike. Styanax is at his best when he's constantly moving between enemies, stripping their defenses, and keeping his team supplied with energy. He's not just a damage dealer, he's a frontline support who happens to solve problems with a spear. Voruna. Voruna is what happens when digital extremes decide that one wolf isn't enough. Voruna is basically a warframe built around 4 different wolf heads, with each one representing a different hunting instinct. Her passive is one of her most unique mechanics because you can choose which of her 4 heads is active, and each one gives her a different passive benefit. That means Voruna isn't locked into one playstyle. You can change what you're getting from her depending on what you're doing. Her first ability, Shroud of Dinar, makes Voruna invisible and gives her increased mobility. The interesting part is that attacking from invisibility can trigger a massive melee attack, making her extremely effective when she gets the opportunity to approach an enemy unnoticed. Her second ability, Fangs of Raksh, is where Voruna really gets getting weird. She can inflict multiple different status effects on enemies, stacking them together and making targets much easier to kill. This ability is one of the reasons Voruna works so well with builds that focus on status effects. Voruna sends out one of her wolves to hunt nearby enemies. Killing marked enemies can restore health and generate energy, allowing her to sustain herself while she is fighting. And finally, Ulfrun's Descent. Voruna releases her wolf instincts and marks enemies for execution. She can then leap between targets, dealing huge damage as she tears through them. The entire frame revolves around hunting. You're constantly choosing your approach, applying statuses, recovering resources, and then jumping from enemy to enemy. Voruna isn't really a traditional melee frame. She's more like a predator that happens to have access to a warframe arsenal. Citrine. Citrine is a support frame focused on survivability, healing, damage reduction, and status effects. Her passive, Geoluminescence, causes health pickups to gradually generate additional health over time. That sounds simple, but it fits her entire design. Citrine wants the battlefield to constantly provide resources for her team. Her first ability, Fractured Blast, sends a crystal projectile into the enemies. It damages them while also increasing the chance that they will drop health and energy. So right from the start, she's creating resources for everyone around her. Her second ability, Preserving Shell, gives Citrine and nearby allies damage reduction. And as the squad keeps killing, that protection becomes stronger. Her third ability is where she gets particularly useful. Prismatic Gem creates a crystal that fires at enemies affected by Citrine's abilities. The gem can deal different elemental damage and help spread status effects throughout groups of enemies. Then there's Crystallize. Citrine fires crystal growths across the battlefield, damaging enemies and covering them in weak points. Attacking those weak points makes enemies much easier to kill and can significantly improve your team's damage output. Kullervo. Kullervo is one of the strangest warframes in the game because his entire design revolves around guilt, curses, an absolutely ridiculous amount of melee damage. His first ability, Wrathful Advance, allows him to teleport directly to an enemy and perform a guaranteed heavy attack. This is already ridiculous by itself, but the ability can also give him increased critical chance, turning him into a monster when paired with strong melee weapons. His second ability, Recompense, has Kullervo throwing knives at nearby enemies. Every enemy he hits becomes part of the healing process, allowing Clervo to recover health as he damages his targets. Then there's Collective Curse. He links multiple enemies together with a curse. When one of those enemies take damage, the others suffer from the same damage. Instead of having to kill 10 enemies individually, you can essentially turn them into one giant damage sharing group. Then finally there's Storm of Ukko. Clervo summons a massive storm of knives around the battlefield, striking enemies and dealing heavy damage. The combination of these abilities make him one of the strongest melee-focused Warframes. Dagat. Dagat is probably one of the creepiest Warframes in the game. She's a headless rider covered in spectral energy, and her entire design is based around curses, ghosts, and horses. Her first ability, Weird Sights, summons spectral sights that spread curses throughout nearby enemies. Those curses can slow enemies down and make them more vulnerable to Dagat's abilities. Her second ability, Doom, is one of the most important parts of her kit. Dagat curses enemies and causes them to take additional damage, but the real trick is what happens when the curse is triggered again. The curse can cause a huge burst of damage, making it particularly effective when you're fighting groups of enemies. Her passive also plays into her survivability, giving her additional critical damage based on her health and allowing her to recover after taking lethal damage. Finally, her ultimate, Rakali's Cavalry. Dagat summons 3 enormous spectral horses and sent them charging across the battlefield. They pass through enemies, dealing huge damage while spreading her doom effect. It's one of those abilities that perfectly matches the frame's visual design. You aren't just casting a generic damage spell, you're basically unleashing a ghostly cavalry charge through an entire army. Corvex. Corvex is one of the most bizarre Warframes in terms of visual design. He looks less like a traditional Warframe and more like someone built a nuclear reactor and decided to give it legs. Corvex is heavily focused on radiation damage, crowd control, and defending areas. His passive gives him additional protection against status effects, which fits the idea of a heavily armored reactor. His first ability creates a massive radiation beam that can pass through enemies. His second creates concrete pillars that trap and damage enemies. His third ability, Containment Wall, creates a giant wall that travels forward and crushes enemies caught in its path. It's exactly as subtle as it sounds. And then his ultimate, Crucible Blast. Corvex unleashes a massive beam of radiation from his chest, hitting enemies in front of him and spreading radiation effects. The fun part is how all these abilities work together. Corvex can gather enemies, lock them down, spread radiation, and then vaporize the entire group with his ultimate, Dante. Dante is probably one of the most unique Warframes we've covered so far, because instead of just pressing an ability button, Dante is basically writing spells. His entire kit revolves around combining 3 different abilities called verse abilities. The first is Light Verse, the second is Dark Verse, and the third is Final Verse. The important part is that the first 2 aren't really the final spell. They're ingredients. You combine them in different orders to create different final verse abilities. And this gives Dante an entire system of spell combinations to work with. One combination can create Ward Warden, which summons a book-like companion that attacks enemies. Another combination creates a massive amount of overguard for Dante and his allies. And another creates a huge area of damage that tears through enemies. The really cool part is that Dante doesn't have to choose between being a support frame or damage frame. He's basically a Warframe Gandalf. Except Gandalf has a gun, a sword, and absolutely no problem turning an entire room into a massacre. Jade. And finally, we have Jade. Her entire team is built around angels, music, light, and sacrifice. And that becomes very important because Jade's abilities are designed around keeping allies alive, while also dealing damage to enemies. Her first ability creates an area that damages enemies and can spread effects across groups. Her second ability allows Jade to apply different musical effects that can either support allies or weaken enemies. This gives her a lot of flexibility depending on what the team needs. Her third ability is especially important because Jade can manipulate the battlefield while supporting allies and helping keep them alive. And then there's Glory on High. Jade takes to the air and uses her glory weapon to rain damage down onto enemies below. This completely changes how she moves around the battlefield. The interesting thing about Jade is that she doesn't fit neatly into one role. She's capable of healing, supporting, or damaging. And she has tools that make her useful in both normal missions and more demanding content. She is essentially an angelic support frame that can turn into aerial weapons platform whenever she feels like it.
Equinox.
Equinox is one of the most unique Warframes in the game, built around the contrast between day and night. She represents two completely different sides of the same Warframe, giving her a very distinctive identity compared to almost anything else in the roster. Her day form leans toward offense and aggression, while her night form focuses more on defense and support. And that duality is really what makes Equinox so interesting. She's a Warframe that rewards you for understanding what the situation actually demands. Koumei. Koumei is a Warframe inspired heavily by Japanese folklore and the idea of fate and fortune. And that's a pretty fitting theme for her because luck is a huge part of her identity. Rather than feeling like a completely predictable Warframe, Koumei is built around the idea that fortune can change the way your run plays out. Her whole aesthetic also fits that concept perfectly. She's a mysterious, supernatural, and heavily tied to the idea of destiny. And what I really like about Koumei is that she feels like a Warframe designed around taking risks. Saito 9. Saito 9 is basically Warframe's answer to the question, what if we made a Warframe specifically for people who really like sniping and shooting? Saito 9 was created by the Orokin as a weapon combining damage and stealth, and his entire identity revolves around being a precise and deadly marksman. He is also the proto-frame connected to Quincy. Saito 9 feels very different from a lot of traditional Warframes. Temple. This might be one of the most bizarre Warframe concepts we've ever gotten. Temple is built around the idea of music, performance, and the power of sound, while also having a distinctly infested aesthetic. Temple has one of the most visually distinctive identities in the entire roster, combining the grotesque nature of the infestation with something much more theatrical and stylish. He is also connected to the wider musical side of Warframe's universe, making him feel like much more than just another combat frame. Oraxia. Oraxia is one of the most sinister looking Warframes in the roster, with an identity heavily inspired by spiders and predatory creatures. She has that unsettling biological design that makes her feel like something that absolutely should not be crawling toward you in a dark room. Warframe has always been willing to make its characters strange, and Oraxia pushes that concept even further. Noko. Noko is another example of just how far the Warframe roster has evolved. Instead of being another conventional armored warrior, Noko has a much more unusual identity and visual style. The frame immediately stands out because of its strange proportions and creature-like appearance, and that's something I really appreciate about the newer Warframes. They don't all need to follow the same visual formula. It's another reminder that Warframe's character design has never been afraid to get weird. Folly. Folly is one of the newest additions to the Warframe roster, and she's another example of how the game's new Warframes are becoming increasingly experimental. Rather than simply being another variation of an existing Warframe archetype, Folly brings her own identity and visual personality to the roster. After all these years, Digital Extremes is still finding ways to make a Warframe look and feel different. Uriel. Uriel is one of the newer Warframes, and his entire identity revolves around a much darker, more demonic aesthetic. He is designed to look less like a traditional warrior and more like something that crawls straight out of hell. The design is aggressive, imitating, and heavily focused on fire and destruction. Uriel also represents something interesting about the modern Warframe roster. The older Warframes often had very simple visual identities. The newer ones are becoming much more elaborate. They are not just characters with powers anymore. They have entire teams built around them. Sirius and Orion. And finally, after covering every single one of these Warframes, we have reached number 1, Sirius and Orion. And there's really no better way to finish this series. Because Sirius and Orion aren't simply another Warframe, they are two rival sons who occupy the space of a single Warframe. Instead of choosing between two completely separate characters, you essentially have two personalities sharing one place in your arsenal. And that concept fits perfectly with the increasingly strange direction Warframe has taken over the years. And that's it, every Warframe explained. From Excalibur all the way to Sirius and Orion, we've finally gone through the entire roster. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.